Hey folks, sorry if you hear some background noise. Unfortunately, because of time constraints, I had to film this at the same time that I'm doing my laundry, so that's fun. And of course, by fun, I mean painfully boring, but you know what isn't boring? This week's episode of Beastars! That's right, we're back for our weekly Beastars discussion. Today we're talking all about episode 11, Marching Towards the Summer Neon Town. But before we get into things proper, I do want to give a big thank you to those of you who shared last week's video over on Twitter, in particular the first 10 of you, at ThatSurgle, at FoxTon2X, at BerserkerVivo, at Leobanova, at Debrianator, at TryGundam, at Toby Greymuzzle, at Lewis Queer, at Yagi D. Hoshi, and at Helix Log. Thanks so much, you guys, for sharing last week's video, and to everybody who shared last week's video. It is super appreciated. And if you too would like to have your name shouted out in next week's Beastars video, then be sure to share this video around on the internet and then tag me at JoJo Talks Too Much over on Twitter, and I will be sure to shout out the first 10 of you in next week's video. Okay, so we opened this episode not exactly where I thought we would. When the episode opens, it's actually with Dom, Jack, and the rest of the gang all looking for Legoshi, and I couldn't help but feel like listen, Dom and Jack, you know that I love you too, but but there are kind of pressing matters happening right now. Don't really have time for the Dom, Jack, and the theater crew show right now. Very important things happening, but at the same time, how could you say no to seeing Jack and Dom? They're clearly best boy material, in particular Jack, who is the goodest of boys. And it was sort of interesting to see them realize that Legoshi's been gone for a while, and then Dom gets the phone call saying, what, he disappeared too? So they clearly know that Louis is also missing in action. So I liked that we get to see that the rest of the student council, or the student body, didn't just ignore the fact that Legoshi, Haru, and Louis all just disappeared. Like it is actually mentioned outright that oh, that's weird. Like they're not back on campus and there's a curfew. Don't forget, Tem was still murdered horribly on campus, so there's still a curfew in action. So with that added on top of everything else, you have that one teacher who's like, okay, so your friend Legoshi, your roommate, is clearly a delinquent, and they're like, what? No. Even they're like, Legoshi? No way. And she's like, no, because does he have an interest in small animals? Because I looked through his bag, and he very clearly does. And they were like, what? No. Even with all the evidence, directly in front of them, Legoshi's friends are like, nah, that's not Legoshi. And even I was just like, it is, but it's still not somehow. She's right, that is what's happening, but they're also right. It's not like him. But I mean, that's the influence that Haru has over him. But I did love the scene of them being confronted by the teacher saying this is what's happening. He's spending the night with that small dwarf rabbit, and they're probably who knows what, and she's freaking out because she's a teacher, right? She's obviously concerned about her students and concerned about the rest of the students as well. She doesn't want this sort of behavior breaking out over campus, and if one person breaks curfew, then everybody's going to start breaking curfew, so she's obviously concerned. And Jack and the rest of the gang are like, what? No, that's ridiculous. And she's like, and then the teacher has to say, imagine if this got out, what people would be saying. You can't have this sort of thing happen. And as she's saying that, you see two other students listening in. And I'm like, oh God, here we go. And it made me realize are we gonna get rumors of not just Legoshi and Haru, but also Louis? Are we gonna get rumors that Louis was also out past curfew? Or maybe Louis made it back in time, but we will talk about Louis, believe me. But maybe he made it back in time. But I liked the idea of the student body spreading a rumor that oh no, it's not just Legoshi and Haru, it's Legoshi, Louis, and Haru. Ooh, an OT3, interesting, because I'm not gonna lie, as time has gone on, I realized that it's way more of an OT3 when you think about it than an OTP between either Haru and Legoshi, Louis and Haru, or, best of all, Legoshi and Louis. But I have to admit that the three of them work so much better as an OT3 because they really do complement each other. Each character really has this sort of influence over the other that brings them, either grounds them or makes them better. And I feel like that's important for all three members, so I can't help but be on board the OT3 Louis, Legoshi, Haru I'm kind of all about it. Normally, I'm not an OT3 guy. It's very rare where that happens, but this is one of them. I ship it like FedEx. Multi-shipping. Never thought I'd see the day. I should also point out that we get a very tragic, very emotional death in this week's episode, and it hit like a truck, and I don't know how I'm gonna continue on now. How can the show continue without Kabu? Yes, that's right, Kabu the stag beetle unfortunately passes away while Legoshi's away, and I'm absolutely positive that's gonna crush Legoshi when he gets back. That really sucks that Kabu died while Legoshi wasn't there. And while we haven't gotten like scenes with Kabu, we're not close with Kabu, you know. He's a beetle, like you can only get so close. But it's still sad. Like it's something that we know Legoshi cared about, and it's sort of like Kabu as a representation of Legoshi's sort of caring nature, like that sort of like restriction that he holds on himself. I think that's really important for not just this episode, but the story overall. The fact that Kabu is passed on. He went to Stag Beetle Heaven. That says a lot about where Legoshi is as a character. And that's one of the things I love about Beastars, is that everything has like a very literal meaning, but then it also has this sort of metaphorical overall meaning on the greater narrative, right? Because Kabu dying is sad because it's going to directly hurt Legoshi, and it's a representation of Legoshi's negligence to his life and his persistence to further his relationship with Haru. But at the same time, it also represents that metaphorical lifting of Legoshi lifting off the shackles of trying to pretend like he's not a carnivore. It's Legoshi embracing the wild side, if you will. How many times have I made that pun in these videos? But it's Legoshi embracing that side of him, and that's why we see the stag beetle. We see Kabu on his hand during the fight, and then Kabu flies off, because that's basically showing that Legoshi, like it's a better metaphor than like if Legoshi was breaking chains or something. I actually think the stag beetle, since we've already seen Kabu throughout the show, like we've seen that Legoshi takes care of some sort of beetle. Like we knew Kabu, not like we knew him by name. This is like the first time I knew him, or I realized what the thing's name was. But it's just the fact that we've seen him caring for this thing over the course of the show so far, and it's sort of related Legoshi's need to care for things. So the fact that it not only dies, but we see it metaphorically fly away from Legoshi, obviously it's a metaphor for Legoshi, like embracing that side of him. And again, I have to give my credit to friggin' Itagaki. She's a goddamn queen. She absolutely is a narrative genius. Again, not only on the surface level, but on a deeper level as well. And that sort of surface level and deeper level storytelling actually does continue on to the actual moment of the episode that I had assumed we were going to open with, Legoshi versus the leader of the Shishigumi. And this is both a physical fight, obviously, very physical, very brutal, but it's also a metaphorical fight as well, since it's Legoshi fighting with his inner carnivore, right? He's like wrestling with this idea that he is both the person to protect Haru, but he's also the person who attacked Haru in the first place. He is both at the same time. He is very much a carnivore, but he exhibits these herbivore nature, this herbivoric nature as well. You know, like he really does want to take care of people. He's a genuinely good dude. As we've said many a time, Legoshi is clearly best boy, so of course he has these sort of this blend of both worlds. And I think that during that fight you see that very prevalently. He even mentions it not like straight up calling it out like this is a metaphorical battle, but he does sort of like comment on the fact that he doesn't want to do this in front of Haru. Like he feels as though this isn't right to be doing this in front of Haru, and he even apologizes to her before he goes full beast mode. And it's a really good, it's a strong emotional anchor for this really energetic fight. And I do have to give my kudos to the CG director Eiji Inamoto as usual, because I do feel like him and his team over at Orange are able to interject a lot of emotion into this fight. The way that the characters move and interact with each other is so brutal. Like when the leader of the Shishigumi gets Legoshi's arm in his mouth and like starts tearing at it, you feel for Legoshi. Like that really must have hurt. But even the guy says like, you are not easy to chomp through. And I'm like, yeah, that's because my boy's a good boy. He's a strong boy. He's a strong boy, but he's also a good boy. And I don't know why I keep referring to Legoshi as the good boy, but he is a good boy. You know what I mean? Like when you see him, you're like, that's best boy. That's a best boy right there. Speaking of Legoshi being one of the best top tier main characters of the year, I should recommend that you guys vote in the Kotatsu Annie Awards if you have not done so yet. Link in the description. It's an annual award show. It's actually going to be hosted here on the channel. New Year's Eve, 4 p.m. You should vote, and then you should show up later. Vote for Legoshi, best main character, just saying. Also, maybe vote for Ascendance of a Bookworm for best fantasy. Do it for your boy. Anyway, we're moving on, because yes, that fight with the Shishigumi leader is very much intense, and when Legoshi finally caves and does what he told Gohin that he would do. He actually does like sink his teeth into the Shishigumi leader, but very important, he misses his vitals on purpose. He does like rip a chunk of them out, which I was like, brutal, but he doesn't do it to kill. He's just doing it to maim. Like he wants to put him down for a little while, and I did like that. I thought that was really interesting, that Legoshi still won't cross that line. But, you know who will cross that line? Shockingly enough, Louis. Holy shit. I was shocked. I will admit that somebody did spoil that Louis would show up, that he was gonna show up during this fight, and I was like, why would you spoil that? But I was not expecting it to be this way specifically. So that was a nice little moment for the show. I thought that was interesting. And the fact that Louis just gives in. Louis like, you know what? I give up. I'm done trying to fight with these adults in this dark, twisted world. I give in. I will become the darkness. Like I am going to. He puts a pistol into a carnivore's mouth, tells him to beg for mercy, then pulls the goddamn trigger. Holy shit. Louis, I don't even know what to say. I don't even know how to unpack that scene, because it's Louis finally, like, it's funny because, like, this shows the dichotomy between Louis and Legoshi even more, right? Legoshi is a carnivore who exhibits these sort of herbivore characteristics, whereas Louis is a herbivore who exhibits carnivore like characteristics, and he really does have this sort of need to be in power, like his craving for power, his craving to be on top, his his willingness to do sort of duplicitous and like characteristically carnivore things. It just goes to show the dichotomy between the two, and I just find that really fascinating. And the idea that Louis would kill, like the fact that Louis would do things that Legoshi maybe should have done but wouldn't do. Louis is the one who takes that further step, and he actually ends up becoming something that he hated. And I thought that was like really fascinating, and it was for Haru, but you can tell on some level, like, yes, it was for Haru, but it was also for him. You could tell that was him just being like, I give up. I'm done trying to be the Beastar. I'm just gonna do things the way, I'm just gonna do what needs to be done. And that blew my mind. I was like, no, but yes, at the same time. Oh, he's Louis, such an interesting character. I'm also like 99% sure Louis is just fine. Like when those other two lions are like, who are you? And they like pull guns out on him. And Louis says like, you could take me, like I'm number 4, and like I'm like, I may not have a lot of meat, but you go ahead and you eat me, and blah blah blah. And I was like, nah, I don't buy it. You don't have a character as awesome as Louis and then kill him, especially off screen. Nah, I don't buy it for a second. But here's where the episode takes a turn, and I'm both like for it and a little like not annoyed, but just sort of like, oh, okay, I wouldn't have done that, but all right. And that's where we get like the second half of the episode, which sort of feels disconnected from a lot of what just happened. And also, we leave Louis on this really intense note, and then we have like hijinks with Legoshi and Haru. And don't get me wrong, it leads to some really intense stuff later. But having them like leave to go get some food at like some cheap ramen shop, like it was just sort of, and like they have like a jokey sort of back and forth. Haru does have a line where she says like, this is one of my happier moments, and I thought that was really cute. like over something so small, and even she acknowledges that. But it's still very jokey, and it just felt like, oh, okay, like, all right. That's not where I expect. But again, like, you have to kind of expect the unexpected. I can never predict where the show's gonna go, but it just felt like I kind of wanted to hang out with Louis a little bit more. Like, I wanted to see where that story was going, especially since, like, we don't know where Gohin is at all. Doesn't show up again this episode, which feels a little bit odd. But maybe he left. I don't know. Maybe he left, or maybe he's still fighting, and those two who, like, cornered Louis were just, like, two lions that got away. I really doubt they killed Gohin. I don't think any of the good guys died there. But yeah, or good guys, quote unquote. Yeah, I don't know. I just felt like it was a little bit disconnected, but that does eventually lead to a very interesting night for Legoshi and Haru. Yeah, so Legoshi and Haru go to stay at one of those naughty hotels, and I was like, Legoshi, my boy, listen, I may be ace, but even I can read the room. Prepare yourself, my dude. But that's not quite how things go now, is it? Because I was expecting Legoshi to, like, panic and run away, because that's, like, sort of the vibe the scene was giving, that, like, Legoshi was, you know, like, Legoshi being flustered. He's a good boy almost to a fault, you know? Like, he's too good for what is happening. He's too much of a good boy. He's to be tainted, you know? Not that Haru's, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just saying, like, not that Haru's doing anything wrong. Like, it's just, you know, like, for Legoshi, he gets flustered easy, so of course he's gonna read, like, the signals wrong. Although I will say Haru was giving some mixed signals, a little bit of mixed signals there. Regardless, it was this really, like, tense scene where, like, you're not sure which way it's gonna go, and then the bomb goes off. Don't worry, if you haven't seen the episode, I don't mean, like, a literal bomb goes off. I just mean that Legoshi does something that I was not expecting him to do until the finale. Is Beastars actually getting 15 episodes? I remember we talked about this in the live chat last time. I'm fairly certain it's getting 15, because that's also what I've been seeing around. I don't know. I really doubt that was the finale. But what I'm trying to say is that I was not prepared for Legoshi to say what he said. And what he said was that he confessed that it was him. He confessed it was him way back in episode 1, that he's the one who almost ate Haru, and he really wasn't sure what was gonna happen that night. He thought maybe he might have eaten her. And in a twist I kind of saw coming, but was still a shock regardless, was that Haru was like, yeah, I know. Like, of course she knew, but she wasn't sure what his intentions were when he tried to become friends with her, whether that was him trying to redeem himself, or maybe if he still wanted to eat her, or maybe if it was something more. And as we know, it's very clearly something more. And it was a fascinating scene, because the direction by Shinichi Matsumi is such that you actually see him in the pose. And I'm sure that's from the manga as well. Like, so I can praise the direction as far as, like, I don't know if this was necessarily from the manga, but whether or not it was, the scene was still directed fantastic. Because you have Haru inside Legoshi's arms, like he's holding her, in the same sort of position, like it's less panicky. She's more like holding onto his arm, not out of like concern, but sort of like just holding his arm because she cares. And you see in the reflection, not the room that they're in, but what you see is the night they met. And it's the fog and outside of the theater, and he's holding her, and he's got the red eyes, whereas in the modern day, he just has his regular Legoshi eyes. But in the mirror, you see the red-eyed Legoshi, like that angry wolf version of him. And it's him and Haru looking panicked. But in reality, the mirror of that, like through the looking glass, we see our modern day versions of those two characters, where it's more of a loving embrace. Same position, different meanings. And I thought that was interesting too. Like, that whole scene had a lot of weight behind it. And I really loved seeing the reflection in the mirror, because to me that was very much like, look at the dichotomy between these two emotions, like Legoshi wanting to eat Haru, but at the same time he also just wants to be near her. He wants to be around her. Like, her very nature captivates him. And I just thought that was such a well-handled scene. Now, again, I don't know if that was Itagaki or if that was Matsumi. Either way, it would mean that the staging of the manga was great, and then it would also mean that the direction was great. Either way, I think it's a credit to both of them, because the mood, the atmosphere of that scene was absolutely brilliant. Probably one of my favorite moments from the episode, except the Louis scene was pretty great too. And after that, they they do what you think. They do the as you say, the horizontal hustle. Well, they try to anyway. Unfortunately, it ends on this sort of like crazy note where Haru like jams her arm into Legoshi's mouth and tries to say that her natural instincts are telling her to dive into his mouth, which, okay, I feel like her natural instinct would be to run away. All right. Either way, it ended the episode on a really neat illustration of what was happening, and it does further complicate things. Yet another monkey wrench into the OT3 that is Legoshi, Haru, and of course Louis. Because since we know that both of these characters have a vested interest in the more lustful side of the relationship, if that's gonna keep happening, that's gonna be a problem for those two. So it's something that they're gonna have to work on going forward throughout Beastars. And I just thought it was really interesting. Also, did I say this was episode 12? I meant to say this was episode 11. Well, would you look at that? It's definitely a JoJo Talks Too Much video because I've already lost track of what I was saying. But I can go ahead and say that I'm gonna end the video here because those were pretty much all my thoughts. That's all the notes that I have written down. And I really just enjoyed the hell out of this episode. Was there some issues I had with it? Sure. But overall, I would give it a very strong A tier. Close to an S, and in fact, I almost put it in the S, but there's like some nitpicky things, and as long as there's those nitpicky things, then I can't give it an S. I feel like I've been too lenient with the S tiers, so I'm gonna give it a very strong A instead. And that's gonna do it for today's video, everybody, so I hope you guys enjoyed. Before we go, as always, I have to give a big shout out to the good folks over on Patreon, namely those in the Earl Grey tier. Calvin Atkinson, Crowbar of Irony, Ionos, Urza, Ginkotaku, Godzilla Fan, No For Nothing, Maria Teresa, Mirth Mouser, Cell, Shadow Creative, Sipco Games, Somastan, Steven, Sukochi, Tristan, and Verdon. Thank you all so much for your continued support over on Patreon. It is so appreciated. And if you too would like to join the T Squadron, then be sure to check out the first link in the description to check out our Patreon page, see all the cool rewards you can get over there, as well as access to our Patreon exclusive Discord. But with all that said, everybody, I am going to take off. I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you are feeling stressed out today, then you go have yourself a warm cup of tea. And I will talk to you all again real soon.